Also in the UK, King Charles III has made his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh. The title was last held by their father, Prince Philip, from 1947 until his death in 2021.
The British royal family isn't just hiding secrets, it's sitting on a ticking time bomb, and right now that bomb has a name, Prince Edward, because what was supposed to be a quiet, respectful inheritance story has exploded into something far darker, far more calculated, and almost surgical in how it was executed. This is not just about titles. This is about power being quietly redirected while the world was distracted. And the most shocking part, the man at the center of it all may have just realized he was playing a game he was never meant to win. Let's rewind, because every scandal has a beginning, and this one starts with a promise that felt almost sacred. A promise whispered through palace halls, dressed up as tradition, but now looking more like a setup. Back in 1999, when Prince Edward married Sophie, the palace didn't just celebrate a wedding, they made a declaration, a commitment. They told the world with confidence that Edward would one day inherit the Duke of Edinburgh title. Not maybe, not possibly, eventually. It was presented like destiny, like a sealed deal already written into the royal script. And here's where things start to feel off, because that promise wasn't just ceremonial. It had structure. It followed the old rules, the same rules that had governed royal titles for generations. The plan was simple. After Prince Philip passed and after Queen Elizabeth II was gone, the title would pass through King Charles III and then be handed to Edward. Clean, orderly, respectful, almost too perfect. But behind that perfect plan, something was already shifting, because when Prince Philip pushed for Edward to receive the title, it wasn't just tradition, it was personal, emotional. A father trying to secure a legacy for the son who was always overlooked, the quiet one, the one who didn't fight for attention, the one who stayed loyal when others didn't. That detail matters, because it turns what happens next from a legal move into something that feels almost like betrayal. Fast forward to April 2021, Philip is gone, and suddenly, silence. No announcements, no timeline, no clarity, just this eerie pause like the palace was holding its breath. Months turned into a year, and whispers started creeping in. Reports began circulating, quiet at first, then louder, that King Charles III might not honor the promise at all, that the title Edward had been waiting for might simply vanish into thin air. Imagine that moment. Imagine watching a lifelong expectation dissolve piece by piece without explanation, because this wasn't just about status. This was about recognition, validation, a father's final wish hanging in the balance. And then, just when it seemed like the door had closed, March 10th, 2023 arrives, Edward's birthday, and suddenly the palace moves. King Charles III grants Edward the Duke of Edinburgh title. Headlines explode. It looks like a victory, a delayed but fulfilled promise. The story, at first glance, feels complete, but this is where everything flips, because what Edward received was not what was promised, not even close. This wasn't the same title his father held. This wasn't the same legacy that had been quietly guaranteed back in 1999. This was something altered, reshaped, almost weaponized, a life peerage, a title that lives and dies with him. Let that sink in. For decades, the understanding was clear this title would continue through Edward's line. It would pass to his son. It would become part of his family's identity. But the version he received, it ends with him. No continuation, no inheritance, no future. And suddenly, the gift starts to look less like a reward and more like a controlled concession. Why would this happen? Why grant the title but strip it of its future? That's where the deeper game begins to reveal itself. Because this decision wasn't random. It was strategic, calculated, almost surgical in how it balanced optics with control. On the surface, King Charles III honored his father's wish. He gave Edward the title, publicly, formally, respectfully. But underneath, he kept the power. By making it a life peerage, Charles ensured that the title would eventually return to the crown, back into his control, or more importantly, into the control of Prince William. And that changes everything, because now the future of that title isn't tied to Edward's family at all. It's reserved, waiting, positioned to be reassigned, possibly to one of William's children. A quiet shift in legacy that most people would never notice unless they look closely. And when you do look closely, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Edward gets the title, but not the power. He gets the recognition, but not the legacy. He gets the honor, but not the future. It's almost like being handed a crown that disappears the moment you take it off. And what makes this even more intense is what it means for his son, James. Because while Edward carries the title, James stands right behind him, knowing it will never never reach him, watching it exist just out of his grasp, watching a legacy he was supposed to inherit quietly dissolve before his eyes. That's not just a legal technicality, that's a generational cutoff. And the question nobody inside the palace is answering out loud is this: was this always the plan, or did the plan change when Edward wasn't looking? Because when you start connecting the dots, the delayed announcement, the sudden shift in structure, the strategic limitation of inheritance, it stops looking like coincidence. It starts looking like control. And in a family where power is everything, control is never accidental. So now the story isn't just about what Edward received, it's about what he lost, without anyone ever saying it directly. And as we dig deeper into the money, the family dynamics, and the silent tensions reshaping the monarchy from the inside, one thing becomes painfully clear. This wasn't just an inheritance twist. This was a quiet rewrite of the royal future. And just when you think the title drama is the deepest cut in this story, the money enters the room and suddenly everything feels even colder, even more calculated, almost like the system itself was designed to quietly favor one branch of the family while keeping the others politely limited. Because let's talk about reality, the kind nobody inside the palace ever says out loud. Prince Edward might carry a historic title, stand at royal events, and represent the crown across continents, but financially, he exists in a completely different universe compared to King Charles III. And that gap isn't small, it's staggering. It's the kind of gap that makes you question whether this system was ever meant to be equal in the first place. While Edward's net worth sits around a modest figure by royal standards, Charles operates on a level that feels almost untouchable. Hundreds of millions flowing through estates, assets, and inheritances that move like rivers, but only in one direction. Because here's the detail that changes everything: royal inheritance rules are not neutral. They are designed precisely, deliberately, to protect the monarch and the direct successor above all else. Which means if you're not next in line, you're already playing a losing game. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, an enormous wave of wealth didn't spread across the family. It didn't divide equally. It didn't trickle down. It transferred almost entirely to Charles. Investments, estates like Sandringham and Balmoral, priceless collections, all of it consolidated at the top. Clean, efficient, untouchable by tax in ways that others simply aren't. And Edward, he watched, not because he wasn't deserving, not because he didn't serve, but because the rules, those same ancient untouchable rules, say that loyalty doesn't equal inheritance. Position does. And suddenly, the earlier twist with his title starts to feel less like an isolated decision and more like part of a much larger pattern. Because Edward isn't just limited in legacy, he's limited in wealth, limited in future transfer, limited in what his children will ever receive. And when you stack all of that together, a quiet realization starts creeping in. The monarchy doesn't just decide who rules, it decides who builds generational power and who doesn't. But just as this imbalance is settling into place, another shockwave hits the family. And this one comes from the most unexpected direction: Prince Andrew. Because while Edward's story is one of quiet restriction, Andrew's is pure chaos. Scandal, collapse, a reputation so damaged that it's not just personal anymore, it's political. And in early 2026, everything escalates. Arrest, investigation, government discussions about removing him from the line of succession entirely. Think about how extreme that is. A royal, potentially erased, and suddenly the ripple effect begins. Because in a family built on hierarchy, when one piece collapses, the pressure shifts. And where does that pressure go? Toward the one still standing, toward the one still trusted, toward Edward. Quiet, loyal Edward who never caused problems, never chased headlines, never rebelled. The same Edward who now finds himself stepping into a role that feels bigger than anything he was originally meant to carry. Not because he's next in line, but because he's safe, reliable, controlled. And here's the twist that makes everything feel almost ironic. The more Andrew falls, the more Edward rises, but not in power, in responsibility, in expectation, in silent obligation. He becomes the crown's dependable figure, the one sent on international trips, the one representing stability while everything else feels like it's unraveling. But even as his importance grows, the limitations around him don't disappear. They tighten. It's like being trusted, but never fully empowered. And then, just when you think the next generation might break this pattern, might finally carry Edward's legacy forward, another quiet decision changes everything again. Lady Louise Windsor. Because her choice might be the most revealing moment in this entire story. At 18, she stood at a crossroads. Accept a royal title, step into the system, become part of the machine that had defined her family for generations, or walk away from it quietly, deliberately, without drama. And she chose to walk. No RH title, no full-time royal duties, no binding herself to a structure that had already shown how selective and restrictive it could be. Instead, she chose independence, education, a life outside the royal spotlight. And in doing that, she didn't just make a personal decision. She exposed something deeper. Because when the next generation starts stepping away instead of stepping in, it raises a question the palace can't easily answer. What happens when loyalty is no longer rewarded and control is no longer appealing? And then comes the detail that feels almost surreal, almost unbelievable, like something pulled from an alternate timeline. Because once upon a time, Prince Edward was offered something no one ever expected: a crown. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, a political group in Estonia reached out with a real proposal. They wanted Edward to become their king. Think about that for a second. A man who would spend his life supporting a monarchy was once given the opportunity to lead one, and he said no. He turned it down, chose loyalty, chose duty, chose to remain part of the British royal system instead of stepping into his own independent crown. And now, decades later, look at what that loyalty earned him. A title that ends with him, a legacy that doesn't pass on, a financial position that pales in comparison to his brother, children who either won't inherit or have chosen not to participate. It's not tragedy in the dramatic sense. It's something quieter, something colder. It's the realization that devotion doesn't always translate into reward, especially inside a system built on hierarchy above all else. And as the monarchy shifts, Andrew falling, Harry gone, William preparing for the future, the structure becomes clearer, leaner, more controlled, more centralized, which leaves Edward exactly where he has always been, and yet somehow more exposed than ever. Trusted but contained, honored but limited, visible but not truly powerful. And when the next chapter begins, when Prince William eventually takes the throne, the final move in this quiet game may unfold. The Duke of Edinburgh title, once promised as a lasting legacy, could be reassigned, redirected, given to a new generation, one that fits the future vision of the crown. And just like that, Edward's chapter closes. Not with scandal, not with rebellion, but with something far more unsettling, a lifetime of loyalty, ending in a legacy that was never truly his to keep.